Hello, everyone. Welcome to FiredUp, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole Pytel, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level. Hello there. Welcome to another edition of Fired Up. My name is Morgan McClintock, and today we're going to be talking about market research. Running a startup is inherently risky, and there's a lot of unknowns. And one of the ways to address that is to conduct some market research so we can actually find out what our target persona is, our ICP, how big the market is, whether our messaging resonates, what are the features that they really need, what are the jobs to be done that we can help address. But at the same time, market research is complex and you can't ask everyone, and it costs money, right? And it takes time. So where do you start? What are the things that you should be researching? What do you know enough about to make some pretty safe assumptions based on your experience and what you're hearing from the market? And what do we need to go out and bring in a partner to help us address so that we can confidently build a marketing program and move forward? So today we're going to be talking to Sean Campbell, and he's the CEO of a B2B market research company called Cascade Insights. So I'm looking forward to talking to him a bit about how a market research firm actually works, how we get the best from them, where should we start, what advice does he give. I'm also interested in how does AI play into this? Increasingly, you could type into ChatGPT some questions that you might have about the market, and it's gathered together everything that there is out on the internet. And maybe you can short circuit that process. Maybe does that mean that we don't need to do as much market research? Or does that mean we need to do more? And how is the overall practice of market research being impacted by its own Gen AI tools? So today we're going to talk to Sean Campbell all about market research, where to start, and so we can start de-risking some of our marketing campaigns. So let's call him in. Sean, hi, welcome to Fired Up. Today we're going to be talking about market research. Before we do, for those that don't know you, perhaps you could just quickly introduce yourself.
My name's Sean Campbell. I'm the CEO of Cascade Insights, and I've been an entrepreneur now for about 24 years. And I've mostly run remote companies, although I've had some time in the office too. And I'm actually somebody who didn't think they were going to run a business at all. I was going to go be a college professor. And I've enjoyed times when I've been able to be an adjunct. I'll probably hopefully get back to that now that my kids are adulting. But yeah, I had no plans. Liberal arts graduate, thought I was going to be a college prof, ended up doing independent trainer work, teaching people Microsoft networking databases, that kind of stuff. And anyway, and that bled into owning a business 24 years ago. And now I've owned two, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, it's got its challenges, that's for sure. But I really, truly, truly love owning a business. And hopefully I'll be given the opportunity to do that to the day I retire.
Great. So your current business, which is Cascade Insights, is a market research firm which specializes in B2B companies. And I feel right now we're in this time of great uncertainty economically, and certainly in tech. We've had a squeeze for a long time in terms of the economy. So market research is a great way to sort of feel through that uncertainty. But let's just sort of set the scene a little bit. What does a market research company actually do?
I say to folks a lot of times we get hired for pain alleviation or to help a company maximize opportunity. So that probably bleeds into what we do, right? So somebody comes to us and says, I'm underpaying. I shipped a poor product or service. My competitors are killing me. The market is difficult and I need to understand it better. Or they want to create some opportunity. They want to launch into a new geography, a new industry. They have a new solution. AI initiatives are something we investigate all the time now. That's a good example. And ultimately, that's why we get hired. And we're there to help clarify, the external market for these folks. Our motto is act with clarity. That's what we do. We just help these organizations act with clarity. The interesting thing about owning a market research firm too is that in a way, you could say you should research everything before you do it, but nobody does that. Nobody can. We can't do that. So I think a lot of the discussion with market research comes down to where is it most appropriate for me, my organization? When do I turn to it and when do I not? And to be honest, I'm not going to be able to give you a binary answer on that. There is a little bit of gray around it, but that's definitely part of the conversation we have with every client. Like where would it be most appropriate for you to do some research? And then of what form should it be once we get around to that? But that's basically who we are.
A market research company just like mechanically has a panel of, or uses a number of different panels of different personas that you can then field. And most of this research is done online, or is this done in person? Are the focus groups? What is the sort of mechanically, how are you finding out the market information?
Good question. For B2B firms, B2C market research firms have some other tools in their toolbox sometimes because the audiences are a little more accessible and they're just broader. They're just more massive, frankly. If you're trying to determine if the next iPhone should be rose gold or not, you could interview almost anyone. With B2B, you have very narrow audiences, which means we typically focus on 3 primary methodologies, although it's not exclusive to this, but these are the 3 major ones. So we do a lot of in-depth interviews. So that's a qualitative approach. So we get someone on the phone and talk to them for 45 minutes, 60 minutes, and get really deep on whatever is of interest to that particular client. We also run focus groups, although many, many times they're virtual. It used to be that they were in person, even for B2B, but for reasons I could get into if you want, even pre-COVID, more virtual activities being done in B2B, that was starting to kind of slowly devolve. We still do them. We did a bunch of in-person focus groups at AWS reInvent because there's a bazillion people that are AWS customers and prospects and whatever there. And the third thing is some kind of web-based survey. So that's the quantitative side of the ledger. And frankly, that's honestly what I think most people think of when they hear market research. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I say I own a research firm, they say you do surveys. And I'm like, honestly, not as much as the other 2. The in-depth interviews are the lion's share of what we do. And I think when you cracked open most B2B research firms, especially those that work with a particular sector, you're going to find that they do a decent amount more qualitative work than quantitative. And the reason for that is frankly some math. If you have a client who says, I want to go after a certain audience, for example, competitor customers, they want to understand the customer base of a competitor. And we'll say, sure, we can do that qualitatively. And the client will say, well, I would really like to do that quantitatively because quantitatively sounds better. You can argue that it's not in many cases, but that's a different point. And they'll say, well, quantitative sounds like numbers. I want that. And we say, guess what? You're not going to get that. And they go, why? And I say, because the math is just all messed up. And they'll be like, well, wait a minute. My competitor has 10,000 customers or 1,000 or whatever. And I'll say, great. But with the average survey response rates being like 3, 4, 5% or lower, you need a lot of targets. And by the way, last time I checked, nobody has a list of all your competitors' customers. And you could try to source that organically, and there's ways to try to identify those customers. But then you start talking about cost profiles that are massive, and they're like, wait a minute, why does it have to be that expensive? And then I go back and say, but we could do 10 in-depth interviews with competitor customers. That would be easy. Or we could interview ex-sellers maybe who worked with the competitor, or we could talk to partners who worked with your competitor. And then ultimately, you'll have a lot of directional insights that can inform what you want to do. It's one of those interesting things on the B2B side. If you went to the B2C side, and of course, I don't own a B2C firm, so, somebody on that side might disagree with me, maybe righteously. But my impression of it is their side of the world starts with quantitative because they just have massive databases of millennials or Generation Alpha or whatever you want to pick, right? That they can go survey. with quick surveys, where on our side of the ledger, you have to do a lot more qualitative, which then what that leads to wrap this little bit up of kind of the plumbing and the mechanics, is that you do have to have a lot of industry affinity, because you're going to get on the phone or Zoom with the CTO of a bank and talk to them about their artificial intelligence initiatives. Well, you can't have just like done a project on M&Ms before that. You need people who understand the space, much like an investigative journalist, right? You have to have enough knowledge of the space. And it also means you should probably be a little wary if you're working with somebody that's kind of a junior firm or really broad, because they probably don't have that depth of people who are going to engage meaningfully with someone on the phone. That's a big pro of working with somebody like us. On the other hand, I think it's a constraint from a business model standpoint, because it takes me a while to find the right people.
Right. You got to have good domain expertise to be able to ask the right questions when you have that person live on the phone, so that you're actually understanding and extracting the right information. And in order to do that, you have to know a bit about cybersecurity. If you're going to talk to CISOs, right?
Right.
You're going to bounce straight out of this conversation. It's not going to be valuable to them, and you're not going to understand what they say.
Exactly. I mean, briefly, like if we watch a great investigative journalistic interview, what is normally the moment where it's more thrilling? It's not usually the question that you can tell was in the interview guide, our equivalent of the discussion guide, which the client maybe collaborates with. It's the moment where they ask that follow-up question and you go, oh, wow, I can't wait to hear the answer to that. And the ability to ask a follow-up off the cuff just requires domain expertise. There's really no way around that.
So I want to talk a bit about different areas that you help B2B companies understand by going out and asking. And the first of those is around buyer behavior. I mean, we all know that in the current market, buy cycles are extending. They require more touch points from a vendor. There's a larger buyer committee. In many ways, I just spoke to a CMO this morning. He was like, okay, our buyer is different in all these different types of companies, and they might have different levels of expertise. So understanding that, how is the buyer journey changing, is really important from a marketing perspective, so that you can, and sales perspective, so you can respond to that. For a company like that, how do you go about that? And maybe you can share some of the stuff that you're seeing from that kind of research at the moment.
Yeah, the general structure of a study like that, there's a couple different versions of studies you can do, but the primary one is a buyer persona study, which would incorporate elements of buyer's journey in a lot of cases. So you're going to go take the people you believe to be your targets as personas, and we're going to conduct 8 to 10 interviews typically with each persona. And you could obviously do quantitative research on top of that, but that's less typical for this kind of study. We're going to do a lot of great discovery, and we're going to figure out what are these people's role in the buying committee for the kind of solution you serve? Who is really ultimately in power? Who is the person that does the discovery work for vendors? And I'll come back to that, because that's one of the things I think companies don't get right, that the research kind of helps set them on a lot of cases. We understand what's going to drive them to engage with a vendor. We understand what pitches they're hearing and what resonates. We understand where they go to get information. We understand how they want that information packaged. And a lot of that just is massive in terms of informing sales outreach, marketing messaging, sales tactics, marketing campaign structure, a million things. And to the point about things we've learned, obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff we can't share, because one of the things that you do when you buy market research is you, in essence, you're buying the advantage of knowing it first. Right? I mean, that is in your space. Maybe you're the company that did research and somebody else didn't about something. So you have this leg up. And so it's this weird thing where, sure, I'm not dealing with national security secrets, but to an extent, I am dealing with secrets that I have to be careful what I say about. But what I can say is like a trend, though. Here's one example, is that I go into an organization and inevitably there'll be this conversation. Well, we want to talk to CIOs, or we want to talk to the C-level. Why do I want to talk to C-level? Well, because, they sign the checks, blah, blah, blah. What happens almost all the time when we do a study like that, for an organization that is perhaps a little less mature or has not done research before, is they recognize pretty quickly that what they're confusing there is the sales team's feedback to marketing that we need content for the CIO. Here's the problem. Given the fact that, like in the SaaS market, all the discovery is digital, right? Go into Google, or eventually we'll go into ChatGPT more and more. We'll just throw something in a Gen AI tool or Gemini, and it'll just serve up the first answer, which, by the way, this isn't a show about SEO disruptions, but that's a whole other animal, right?
Yeah.
And as a public service announcement, well, that's not necessarily our space is SEO. If you heard that and you thought that's the first time I've ever thought I should go check what my ranks might look when Google pushes out their big next generation search experience thing coming up soon, I would go think about that. But what ends up happening is they build all these assets, whereas realistically, from a digital standpoint, it's someone extremely junior who's doing the searching. And it's weird because if you ask the company that, they know that. Hey, CMO, who commissioned the buyer persona study that you want us to go talk to CIOs because they're important. I'm not saying they're not important. CMO, do you go search for tools that will help you figure out how to deal with Google's next generation search experience? No. You go find some content marketer about 6 levels down, or even more differentiated. You go ask your direct, who asks their direct, who finally finds somebody who's got time to do that search. And about 3 months later, you show up in a meeting of 3 vendors who've all been shortlisted before they even get to you. And we'll lay these things out. And it's funny to me because I think sometimes they know it, but they're trying to convince everybody that it's happening, right? Because sales is over there saying, I lost the deal in the CIO's office. Because it's interesting when you look at the data sets, right? If you looked at the sales pipe, they would say the deal ended and didn't proceed in the CIO's office. That's what the CRM says. So they go to marketing and they say, I need CIO content. And it's like, but that's not exactly what you need, right? You might need a different pitch. You might need a better proposal. You might need better pricing models. You might need better messaging for the CIO. But that doesn't mean that the digital front end of the journey that brings people to the site initially to do the trial and everything else needs that. It's those kinds of things where we add a lot of grounding to that. And then they feel like they can go do something. Or another classic example where a marketing team will bring us in to do research that helps with that is brand awareness is such a sticky topic because the C-levels will tend to look into our accounts at the marketing team and be like, I've already given you enough. Can't you just rub a couple dollars together and like make us more aware? Right? I mean, they say it that way, but I think sometimes that's the intention. You've already been given a lot of money. Why aren't we aware? Why is the market aware of us? And the marketer says, well, because it's hard and we're the 10th vendor to enter this space. It's not my fault that the founder entered a space that was crowded already. Or 5 other people have way bigger marketing budgets than you. And so we will come in and benchmark where they sit. And that can lead to like really effective conversations internally about, well, do we need to spend more? Or how effective has our spend been? So sometimes I think actually exists to resolve arguments. I mean, my favorite story on that was we were in a deal with a client who became, deal with a prospect who became a client. And we were down to the last 2 vendors, us and somebody else, and they put like 17 people on the call. It was kind of a little crazy, to be honest, because normally you don't have 17 people show up to vet. But it was strategic to them. It was very strategic to them. I'll back up slightly really fast because it's relevant to market research use cases. This CMO, oddly enough, had dropped the best thing I'd ever seen in our contact us box. And I'll get the number wrong, but you'll understand why that doesn't really matter. But it said, our organization is a upper mid-market SaaS company that serves thousands of customers. As of right now, we have over 1,000 documented different use cases and market segments, basically because nobody here ever spent any time to focus on ICP. Please help us, for the love of God, figure out what our ICP should be that actually matters so we don't end up with everybody wanting assets for everybody. Great ask. And it was pretty much written exactly that way, which is great clarity. And I got into the meeting with them and they said, well, why should we hire you? And of course, lots of things were discussed, and that's not material here because it's not a commercial for us. But I said all these things and I said, but ultimately, I want to make you guys stop arguing with each other because that's what I'm hearing. I'm watching the 17 of you basically not decide what your company's ICP is. We are here to help you stop arguing and to have some clarity and move ahead. And that's a lot of fun for us. But it does require the client to recognize that they have that lack of clarity and that they're willing to invest in it, ultimately. But that's part of the fun of doing this, I guess.
In some ways, this is to help. In the example where you give, actually, the person that's putting together the short list of the 5 or 6 platforms that we're going to look at, technical platforms we're going to look at to solve this problem, is pretty junior, right? Because that's a desk exercise. Looking at people's websites is going to take some time. And actually, you need your marketing and your messaging to be focused on that person, because they are literally the gatekeeper, and they may not have deep domain expertise. They may not have implemented, they're not the CISO, right? Or the CIO or CTO. They're new to this. It's not normally part of their job. So some of the educational material needs to be fairly basic.
I don't know if I'd say basic,
Okay.
because I don't think and I know you don't mean this either. So I think we're on the same page. Like, everybody's job, once you get to a certain level in an organization, right? Say you're like the director of content marketing, or you're even a manager or whatever, your job's probably complex in the way that, most people would think about it. I mean, you'll learn new skills, but to your point, it has to speak to that person probably more than it needs to speak to all the other people in the chain initially. Now, maybe we need to allow a pathway to get to those types of content, but there's just such this overemphasis. I feel it's all the time, that people will forget that low person on the totem pole who's actually the person typing on a keyboard looking for your solution. And that's a big takeaway for sure. The other one right now, I would say that's definitely true, is you just have to say you're doing something AI related. Conversations just don't even begin, but then you have to be truthful about it, because there's so much AI washing going on. And I think that is a tough thing to figure out, because I think in technology right now, if you don't say you're doing something with AI, you're almost just not getting invited to the conversation. It's true of us as well, by the way. I mean, we've made massive investments in powering our team via AI tools, like through the market research process. And I find that that's important for us too, frankly.
I want to talk to you about that, because, when we're talking about personas, I've read often that people are like, okay, things like ChatGPT are great for market research and to research and build personas, because, it's a bit like an assistant. You can query it and it will have some information, right, that you maybe isn't in your brain. So it's not entirely fictional and not within your first party data within your company. How is AI impacting market research? Are you seeing more companies like just turn to a chatbot to kind of build those personas, or not?
Absolutely happy to talk about it. You're scratching what's called synthetic respondents, basically, in the market research. And if somebody wants to look at what I feel is a pretty rich piece we put together on it in partnership with a guy that does an AI solution for market research, just Google what are synthetic respondents in market research. We're the first hit on the page. But here are some things about it to think about. Yes, it exists because organizations are looking forward to a day where they could literally just create a customer bot. And of course, potentially tens of customer bots of different types of personas. And everybody from sales and marketing and product can just interact with the bot. So then that begs the question, well, how does the bot get populated with information and what's safe and whatever? So, and I'm happy to go down this road as far as you want, but I'll hit a couple high level things, then we can dig in deeper into these if you want. Is one, yes, you can just prompt engineer your way to a rudimentary persona, right? You just throw stuff into ChatGPT or Gemini or Perplexity or Claude or whatever. And that can be a lot of fun and it can be useful for backgrounder. Like, for example, we would use it when we're putting together a discussion guide, perhaps. Like, we've got domain expertise, but we can use that as a way to, identify maybe additional questions that maybe we weren't thinking of. I also need to say this, and I'm going to say it once, but I want anybody listening to really understand this point applies to every single thing I'm about to bring up. You absolutely have to understand if the tool you are about to use is going to put your data in its training data set. You have to understand it. And however, that doesn't happen all the time. For example, if you use ChatGPT's Team Edition or their Enterprise Edition, they explicitly state that your data will not be used for training data. Now, I know someone's listening like, I don't believe that. Okay, well, if we're going to start out by disbelieving a written agreement, well, there's a different podcast for y'all. I'm not going to try to go there. I understand security breaches. I understand it, but we all use cloud services all day long. I'm not going to try to make that part of the discussion today. Although obviously some diligence around how you're interacting with tools and picking maybe household name tools so that you understand you have a throat to choke, so to speak. Those are good things. So yes, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is that you can use the ChatGPT GPT builder. Those guys really need better branding, by the way, as much as it's an awesome tool. But anyway, so you use the GPT builder, and the GPT builder can ingest a limited amount of data, and you can give it a custom instruction set, which is somewhat akin to what you would do just from the prompt, but it's more persisting it. And again, I'm sketching a little bit of the surface, but you can add a lot of richness to how it responds, the role it takes on. We have done this for our own client personas. We have certain clients that we target and personas. We built those. We also built GPTs for individual, commonly targeted roles. For example, like a data engineer or an IT leader or whatever, right? What's the step beyond that? Well, the step beyond that is when you start to think about making one basically in code. So you got a developer, and they're going to call the OpenAI API. And you're going to have a few more knobs to turn then, because by directly accessing the API, you would, right? It's like all apps ever been built, right? The app you're using is probably calling an API or an underlying infrastructure. If you wrote code, you might have more options and fidelity, but then it's the classic case. We all don't write code to send our emails. We go use Gmail, right? So there's a limit to how much all of us, but if you talk to a developer, some of them have built their own app to send email for fun. Okay, great. But most of us don't necessarily need that. But there is utility to it in certain scenarios. So say you want to ingest multiple different types of data streams. You want to ingest interview transcripts, but you also want to interview. And by the way, I'm not saying this is even legit from the TOS for G2 Crowd. I'm just using it as an example. So we have not done this, and it may be illegitimate from the TOS. But say you wanted to scrape all the reviews from G2 Crowd as a data source, right? And you wanted to say, I want to throw that in the mix, in the blender with the market research interviews. And I want to grab the Gong.io recordings from sales calls with people who were like these people. Well, now at that point, you got a couple things in play. One, you've got the text window that OpenAI and these tools give you. And if it's a small enough ask, you might be able to shove everything you want in the text window and kind of get it done. It's probably not the most optimal way to do it. That's for like a more limited data set. You could vectorize the data, store it in a vector database. But now you're talking about fairly significant development, so I won't go down that road.
It's pretty technical once you're into building your own vector database.
But here's what's really interesting there. I was talking to a company that builds synthetic respondents for market research purposes. And the guy said, this is where you would have to decide when we get to that deeper point of coding. Why don't I just go to an organization who's built a front end or has the tools to give me those synthetic respondents, tailor the way I want, can ingest my data, can carve it up. And the guy said to me when I said, yeah, I know there's some companies who are like trying to go down the deep road of building their own, like that developer who tries to write up their own email client just for fun, right? And he said, yeah, it's like the 90s. It was like, market research firms built their own survey tools in some way to trap the user into using your survey tool. It's like lock-in. And he's like, that's laughable because eventually the people who are just building synthetic respondents that have tens of AI and data scientists, AI focused people and data scientists, they're just going to win. They're going to build that out. The reason I brought that up is to get all the way back to the beginning in a bit. How does this look in the end? Synthetic respondents are just another way to enrich the research process, either on the front end, such that you use them as an adjunct to talking to people, because all synthetic data will have a cutoff date. And progressively, that cutoff date will get closer to today. But even so, what's happening today, that will be difficult for an AI to grab, right? Elon Musk may disagree if we plug a chip in everybody's head. But until that happens, right, there's always going to be an air gap that research can very meaningfully fulfill. And then the other place it's very useful is after a research project, chatting with the findings. So you sit there and you're like, instead of just getting a PowerPoint, I would like you to build personas. And we're doing that. And so we build a persona of this this research data. And so you can chat with it afterwards to ask follow-up questions you might not have considered. And so I think it's just a logical wrapper to all of it. And the last thing I'd say on it is, and I tell my team this all the time, nobody pays for research they can find on the internet. So if ChatGPT on the internet last time I checked, and if you had a provider that maybe built on ChatGPT and said, you know what? I have hundreds of different technology personas, all the ones that buyers interact with. You could guess this is coming. It's like G2 Crowd for personas. And so it's sitting out there on the internet. Good for them. I think it's great. I love it. I'll access it. But guess what? It won't answer every question in the immediate that somebody has. It can't, because there's a cutoff date. And we haven't even got into biases. The only thing I'd say on biases, it stands to reason these are biased data sets. They scarfed all their information from the internet. And the last time I checked, the internet is biased. And it's biased in terms of the types of people who contribute content, like the whole story about the New York Times, like, oh, we scraped all this detail from the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or whatever. Well, unfortunately, and I truly say unfortunately, if you looked at the bias of people who are sometimes editorializing online on major publications, well, they skew to certain genders, right? Certain racial profiles. That is not indicative of all markets. That is not indicative of best practices. The data set is biased. And so, what if you need to work around those biases or look at people's responses from different geographies, right? Or you have DEI restrictions on what you need to basically go after from a market research data set. We have projects like that too, where they say, here's the characteristics of the audience. All that to say it's not horribly biased. I mean, I guess that depends on what you're searching. But that's what I think of it as. I think it's just a foundation that we will build on top of. And from that standpoint, it just gives me a higher vantage point of what the real world issues are. And I get to give stuff to clients faster and better. And I'm like, hallelujah. I think that's great.
No, that's a good insight. So it sounds like there are going to be custom tools that are with custom data sets that are going to be built that companies can query in advance with these synthetic personas to shape their market research, or post to validate and sort of explore it a little bit further. And what that means for market research firms is that, you can be a bit more focused. And of course, the research that you do is specific to the company and the particular audience that they're going to go after, which is not going to be in these generic data sets.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just a new foundation to build on. I'm excited about it. And the very last thing I'd say very briefly is just, I think you have, just like all things where there's an opportunity to custom develop or buy it off the shelf, I think we'll see all those options. It's just ultimately the teams that are 20 or 30 artificial intelligence geniuses and data scientists, they're going to win out. So in a way, it's going to be very akin to the way market research today goes to panels, network firms to solicit respondents. We will just have an army of people who will be providing us synthetics, and we will decide when and where they fit into the research process. And then we might create bespoke synthetics at the end. And I just think that's really cool. And we're doing that kind of work now. And I think it's just going to keep growing.
Yeah, that is exciting. And one of the areas that you do market research on, and sort of touches on the work that we do, we develop new messaging. Hey, we've gone into a room, we got the market, the market's evolving. When we were launching from stealth, or we were launching a new product and we need to build out the messaging, and you get some consensus internally on that. And these are the words that we think we would like to say. But then you go out, and does that resonate with the audience or not? Is it really making sense to the right personas? And that sort of transmission is something that a market research company can really help to validate it more quickly. Or maybe in advance of launching the new messaging, if there's time, you can go out and validate it before you've kind of gone, ta-da, here's our new strapline and our new positioning, only to find actually it didn't work and you've had to crawl back a little bit from that, which, I mean, you see that a fair bit.
Yeah, that's fairly common. And you hit some of the elements of it. It depends a lot on where the client's at in their workflow.
Yeah.
When they come to us. Just this morning, I talked to somebody and they said, we work with this agency. They built the messaging framework. Now we need to surface some proof points and then test those proof points and the messaging with the audience. But they've pretty much decided on their messaging framework, so they're going to do tweaks. Or to your point, we begin at the start and we help them even craft some of that precursor messaging. And then we pre-test it, refine it, go back. But like I say to people all the time when we're talking to, prospects or current clients, at some point, you're always going to have to decide with research how much you research, right? You can't possibly research every decision you're going to go make. No one does that. So it's just this kind of, where is that cone going to sit? Where do you have the most uncertainty such that you want to act with clarity? And that's where we're going to help you. And you somewhat get to decide that. And we will help counsel you as to what you could illuminate around the edges if you want. But that's how it plays out. And yeah, there's all kinds of stories we've had about messaging that looked good on paper, but didn't really work. My favorite, very short one was, and I'd also suggest this is why you want your salespeople in the review meetings for your messaging if you're a B2B company, because salespeople, in my mind, are executing on a never-ending qualitative research project if they're doing complex sales. And they're engaged in year-long sales cycles. And so anyway, this sales leader was in this meeting, and the client had written the precursor messaging. So it was a meeting to coordinate on that and react to the initial feedback we got from research participants. And so the slide comes up, and a marketer was advocating for digital transformation as a phrase. And the sales guy said, I personally think we should have a swear jar around here that people have to put $100 in every time they say digital transformation. And then you could hear a pin drop. And I'm like, hallelujah, man. I'm glad you're here, because you actually have to say the words digital transformation to a human being, which is way different than writing them on a web page and saying, oh, I guess we're on page 1 for it. So I think there's just a lot of validity to that. And even as a small firm, we do it all the time. I mean, I'm always rethinking every client conversation. I'm like, okay, so that's kind of core to our messaging, but how did they react? And where did that go? And I solicit feedback from the team. If you can't afford market research, I guess where I'm going, because in a weird way, as a small boutique research firm, right, of like 12-ish people, we don't research everything we're going to go do. We can't, but we are listening. I've honestly never said this on a show, but I think you're doing market research if you're listening. Unfortunately, not every company leader listens. I've literally never said that. If it sounds like I might remember that for later, that's true. Right. It's true. I mean, but listening, as we all know, is an active activity. And that is something that any organization can do. And then market research just amplifies that. It gives you more things to listen to, and it synthesizes what you've heard and all that. And that's what's great about it.
Right. So a lot of this market research is de-risking particular decisions that they may need to make in terms of, hey, do we target this particular persona with this messaging, and where do we put our marketing resource? Do we put it? You talked earlier about building brand. That's great, but it takes time and it costs money. It's an investment. And we've also got to hit this quarter's numbers, right? So which is it? It might not be both. It sounds like some of the work that you do is consulting with a company about, hey, here are the different things that we could find out, and here's where we should start. Here are the priorities. And where do those normally start? Is it normally persona development? Is it normally working out the TAM? Are we even in the right market, let alone, where do they tend to start?
That's a great question. Where should they start and where do they start? You were outlining more where they should. I don't think that's always where they start. And some of that has to do with factors we probably would never have time to get into. Like an enterprise company may start in a different space if it's an offering that's adjacent versus new. A startup has to start in a different space than an enterprise. I mean, there's a million things that you think about. I mean, there's the standards, right? You do have to know your ICP. You have to understand if that's an available market to you. You have to understand the size, if it's worth the investment. But I would say it back a little differently, if this helps, is that there's almost this constellation of projects, I say that 4 or 5 that are always showing up for us. And I think it has a lot to do with where the client's feeling the most pain, and they almost shoot into the wagon wheel of those. And then they will make their way around the wagon wheel, figuring out other things. So brand is one that we talked about. Although interestingly enough, when the economy is bad, we get no brand projects. There's probably some intuitive people that would be like, hey, I understand that. And when times are good, we get lots of brand projects. There's the competitive aspect. What does my competitive landscape look like? So that's looking more deeply into the competitors and their emotions and what their customers like. That's the anti-proton to the brand thing. When times are bad, we get lots of competitive work. Messaging is huge. And, again, like you research your competitors and you realize they have really good messaging that resonates. Well, now you need to develop your own messaging. Then there's the buyer persona side. So maybe we start with buyer personas, but then we have to do the messaging research to say, okay, for those buyer personas, let's get deeper into the messaging. And that's kind of the way it flows, basically. Just to give you four, there's a couple other ones that are kind of the 1B to those, but those just are very typical. I'd say ICP research is probably the other one I should absolutely say. So those five are different entry points. And then people will kind of recognize that there's other pieces of the puzzle they have to fill in to make a fit
on their journey and their sort of research life cycle.
Exactly. So said differently, if I was to say what you should do is you probably should find a way to invest in all five because they're really the five critical stars in that constellation because they solve for the grand majority of things. ICP is, sure, you're not doing a deep market segmentation, TAM, SAM, SOM thing, but you've done maybe a really good qualitative with some quant on what your ICP should be, right? And that's probably good directional. You got the messaging. Okay. Website messaging can be set. Some of your content assets now at least have something to hang on. Competitor. All right. Well, you have some understanding of what you're going to face in sales, partnering models, what competitive marketing will look like. Brand, if you've got time to invest in it, well, obviously a lot of this stuff should roll up under a brand message. And so how does that bench? I think if you go across the five, by the time you're done, honestly, I would question if a client said, well, I'd like to do 7 other research studies, right? Unless they're in different market segments and with different types of customers, I would kind of say, why don't you pause, execute for a while and see where your problems are or where your opportunities are. And then we can always come back and do something custom. But those are the places I would start for most people.
Yeah, that gives them a good foundation to kind of go to market.
I don't think you need to research everything. I don't think you would need to necessarily do all those to have functioning companies. There are probably something that's odd for somebody who owns a research firm to say, but I've always been straight up. There's functioning firms who the leadership is a mix of intuitive and lucky.
Yep.
And they've not done any research. And God bless them. I think that's great. You don't necessarily need to do that. There are people who run businesses without a CFO for a while and they get lucky too. So
yeah, that really is a risk.
It's not that you can't do it. It's just, I think you got to go figure out where you want to put that little spotlight and we'll help you figure it out. Or are the firms like us for different spaces? There's firms that target pharma and healthcare and all kinds of things too. So yeah, that's basically what we're up to.
That makes perfect sense. Before we move on to our next section, do you have any other sort of final thoughts or advice for startups as they're thinking? The entry point on that wheel that you mentioned can be anywhere, right? Almost. But any other pieces of advice, having worked with a lot of B2B companies that you tend to give?
More for startups, I would say, listen. Startup founders are, and I've started 2 companies, right? I'm not a startup founder in the way we think of it, right? You think of like a SaaS company or something like that, right? But still starting a company. As an owner, I say a lot of times, you're in a situation where owning a business is an ego creation and deflation factory. You have to figure out how that's going to work for you and try to keep that level. I think after 24 years, I know how to do that. But that comes with sometimes an inability to listen, right? Because the desire and the strength of conviction you have about what you're building can get in the way of you actually listening to the market. And I'm not the first person to say that. You could just go on any social media platform and see 72 startups that failed yesterday just because of that they failed to listen. So I would say listen. I would say the next biggest thing is either understanding your buyers or understanding competitor motion. And that would assume you have an ICP. Like if you don't have an ICP, that's where I would start because narrowness is next to godliness when you're small. That's a whole nother conversation. And you probably had people talk about it on the show before, but like the biggest advice I give anybody starting a business of any kind, I'm like, for the love of God, pick narrow. Unless you've invented the mousetrap of mousetraps that is really unique, like you've launched Starlink, be narrow. It makes everything else easier. That's basically the initial advice I'd give startups. So like listen well and engage in some at least micro research studies in those directions. I think that's the biggest bang for the buck.
Right. Try and find the niche that's so valid that you can build a business around and really look into that.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd say too is trust qualitative. One of the problems with the startup community sometimes is they're getting money from somewhere else. And those are bigger organizations that think about financial bets, rightly so. And so we've had this dynamic crop up sometimes at startups where the startup comes in pounding their way in the door saying, I need a quant study. I need a quant study. And I recognize the reason they need it eventually is their investor community that they're relating to needs a quant study that proves out the ICP or a quant. But the problem with quant in the early days is if you're asking the wrong questions, you can spend a lot of money to get answers to questions you don't need. And the other problem is quant can get kind of expensive if you really want a lot of statistical validity. And startups don't have a lot of money. So they end up in this rock and a hard place between their investor side, who wants this kind of certainty of quantitative research. And I could honestly quibble that at times the qual is way more certain. But I get it. It's easier to look at a chart and feel like that's more accurate. So there's this rock and a hard place thing I think startups end up too. So, and we've had lots of conversations like that where we're really advocating for more of a discovery qual because I honestly legitimately think that's a better bang for the buck and what they need. And they're like, yeah, I know, but the powers that be are only going to fund a quantitative study.
Right.
And we're like
charts.
Right. Again, charts can be great, but they can also be full of stuff that doesn't matter. I mean, I tell my team all the time when they send me a chart, I've done this for years. This is for studies or internal data. And I'm not a negative guy, so don't read this way, but I say, tell me where this data lies first. Because there's no data that's ever been written that doesn't have a falsehood embedded in it. And I want to know what that is. Where is the thumb on the scale in this? Either because of the data set itself or the way it's been visualized and the way it's discussed. I got to the point that I don't do this anymore, but a few years back for some internal dashboards, I literally had it as a line under the chart that somebody had to write. Where is this lying? And it doesn't mean that I didn't use the chart to make business decisions, but because I found what that did is it forced the deliverer of the chart to ask the question of themselves, which was actually almost more critical than what they wrote.
I like the lesson of, hey, listen, it's nice to have the charts and the numbers, but talk to 10, 15 of your ICP and in a deep way. As long as they're representative, you're going to get directional information there that you can actually act on reliably rather than some assumptions that you've skimmed over a lot of people that cost you a lot and you didn't really unlock. There wasn't an insight that was unlocked from that. Our next section is called Fired Up 5, and this is our quickfire round with some more general questions. So are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. What would you do if you weren't in marketing and market research?
There's a few careers, like most people that are entrepreneurial. I would either be a college professor, there'd probably be part of it,
right.
Or at least I'd absolutely be teaching because I am pathologically incapable of learning something and not wanting to teach it. All my hobbies are teaching. I would either I've thought about this. I love fishing, so I'd probably start some kind of teaching kids how to fish ministry because I love teaching kids how to fish. And I'd probably ski a lot. Something like that, something teaching or whatever that mixes in some of the hobbies. That's probably what I'd be doing. As far as a career goes, I like owning a business. So that's where I'd be.
What's the best career advice that you've ever been given?
Read stuff you disagree with.
Good.
Seriously, read stuff you disagree with. Nobody reads stuff they disagree with. And a concrete example of that, and it's short from my history, is I think it's probably fair to say that the world has watched U.S. presidential elections with a great degree of interest over the last several election cycles, including the current one.
Mm-hmm.
And I got out of the last election cycle, and I'm intentionally being vague about my political leanings because it doesn't matter. But I said, I want to understand the office of the presidency. So I read a biography on every U.S. president. And I just finished that a couple months ago. Absolutely fascinating journey. Did I agree with everything those presidents did or would do? Or if I just on the surface of it, would I be excited to read a biography on Herbert Hoover? Probably not. Or Phil Moore. There's some really dead periods in the U.S. presidency. Just to be clear. So, there's some fairly snoozer presidents, right? For guys that led a country. But anyway, I learned a ton. And I learned a lot about the country. And I was challenged on some things that I thought were new or not new, or maybe they are new in terms of what we're dealing with, right? So I just read stuff you disagree with. I think that's the biggest piece of advice. And if you think you have, I really want to challenge you. Like if you watch CNN, go watch something else. That something else doesn't have to be Fox. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying go watch something else. And the last thing I'd say on my point about read with disagree with, you're not reading it to agree. You might get to the end and still disagree with it. But I think something changes in our brain when we actually consume something in its entirety that we disagree with, and we pause and we decide what we're going to retain or agree with out of that. I don't know anything better for making you more resilient in your ability to kind of deal with change and those kinds of things. So that's what I would say.
It's good advice. What book do you most often recommend?
For business, I'll leave it at that. There's a book called Managing the Professional Services Firm by a guy named David Maister. Fantastic book for services firms owner. It's dated a bit in certain sections, but the general thrust of it is amazing. I still have make it mandatory reading for the team here, certain chapters of it.
What's the strangest job that you've ever done?
I don't know if I feel like any of them are actually really strange. Maybe the strangest thing that happened to me, or oddest thing that would happen to a 17-year-old. I was working at Burger King and I decided to open up my mouth about something to some manager. And before I know it, that got said to somebody else. Long and short of the story was they needed to go pick somebody to go to New York for an ad campaign because they needed to pick somebody who was representative of the regions. There was 10 of us that got to go to New York when I was 17 for free.
Wow.
For about 3 days. And of course I had to stand in some hotel and sing the theme song for the campaign, which was something like, if you were going to pick up a burger tonight and make it just right, ooh, 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 or whatever, something absolutely horrendous. And all 10 of us had to stand there in our Burger King uniform in front of some ad, whatever thing, and represent the flag. And the same job, only having been there 9 months, some listeners might remember something called the Jerry Lewis Telethon. I'm 53 in the States, and it was a huge production. I think it was for muscular dystrophy. It was broadcast everywhere. And I was given the opportunity to go on national TV and present a check for the dollar donation off the Rodney reindeers. There were these little stuffed animal things you could buy from Burger King. Anyway, I get on national television, and to add the punchline to the story, I get home and my parents slept through it. And this was in the era where you couldn't actually record it.
Last one here. What are you most excited about for 2024?
I could say AI. I could say the tools.
Yeah.
But if it's okay, let me answer just slightly differently. I don't want to be that kind of guest. But somebody asked me something that they said, what makes you excited about the future? And I thought it was an interesting question because it's obviously kind of a interesting time in some people's minds. People feel threatened by what's going on, or they feel the world's fallen apart, or, those kinds of things. And my answer is history. I'm a huge history buff. I mean, seasons of calamity are usually followed by seasons of rebirth. The problem is sometimes those take a while, right? And they don't always fit neatly in a human lifespan either. I wish they did. I'm sure there's people in the middle of the dark of the Middle Ages that wish it all just fitted in a lifespan and we could just get to the Renaissance between being 10 and 60. But that doesn't happen. And I believe there's a lot more goodness in people than we give people credit for. And it takes a while for it to show up. And sometimes it takes multiple lifetimes for countries and regions and problems to get solved. And I recognize we don't always have the time for that. But history, honestly, is what gives me faith. In 2024 and 2025 and 2026, that's what does it. And I know some people would look at history and say, what do you mean? It's all darkness. And I'm like, no, it's not all darkness. There's been plenty of moments of light, and we just have to go run to those.
I agree. People are living longer. They're more educated. They have a better quality of life. In many ways, there's lots of reasons to be hopeful. And even in a short term, disruption with AI that you just mentioned, it is ultimately going to benefit people. And it's an exciting time.
I agree.
So Sean Campbell is the CEO of Cascade Insights, a B2B market research company. Sean, thanks for your time today. Really enjoyed our conversation. If people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
Just go to cascadeinsights.com. You'll find me there. You'll find hello@Cascade. Or if you want to email me directly, there's no mystery to it. You'd find it on the site. It's just Sean@cascadeinsights.com. And always happy to chat with folks.
Wonderful. Sean, thanks for your time. Enjoyed it. Look forward to talking to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
Well, that about wraps it up for today. But before we close, we did want to offer all of our Fired Up friends a chance to grab a mega pack of all of our ebooks and guides. That's our guide to content marketing. That's our startup guide to paid media using Google Ads. It's our guide to attribution. You can get all of those, over 100 pages of goodness, at firebrand.marketing/firedup freebies. That's freebies with an S. And we hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, or drop us a note at firebrand.marketing. And as ever, the details of how to get in touch with our guest today can be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening. And until next week, get out there and crush your marketing goals.